stay up here if you want to wait until like 2 seconds. Yeah. Alright. Gonna check in here.
Give me a smile, cause he knows that's me that has come to see. Forget about life for a while. And the piano, it sounds like a carnival, and the microphone smells like a beer. And they sit at the bar as the train winds down.
Good morning. Welcome to the Winchester Unitarian Society. We gather in joy and gratitude as a congregation, both here in the sanctuary today and via our live stream connection. I'm Marcy Thompson, and I am your worship associate on this beautiful final Sunday in July. As Unitarian Universalists, we share not a creed, but values, including spiritual growth, social transformation, and environmental responsibility. We welcome all to our liberal religious congregation, individuals of all racial and ethnic backgrounds, individuals of all sexual orientations and genders, individuals of all incomes and abilities, individuals of all religious beliefs, and individuals with beliefs that may not have always been considered traditionally religious. May we on this day reaffirm our commitment to our shared UU values and to living out these values through worship, reflection, connection, and service. Today we are blessed with a special service prepared by our member, Dan Hermes. Now, for those in the sanctuary, please give a wave to those of us who are joining via live stream today. And for those in the sanctuary, let's take a moment to greet one another briefly. You will be called back into the service by the ringing of the bell from our partner church in Marosvasarhe, Transylvania. Put my And now the opening words by Dan Hermes.
Good morning, everyone. So this quote is from John Steinbeck's East of Eden, from the introduction. I believe that there is only one story in the world, the only one that has frightened and inspired us, so that we live in a pearl-white serial of continuing thought and wonder. Humans are caught in their lives, in their thoughts, in their hungers and ambitions, in their avarice and cruelty, and in their kindness and generosity too, in a net of good and evil. I think that this is the only story we have, and that it occurs on all levels of feeling and intelligence. Virtue and vice were warp and woof of our first consciousness, and they will be the fabric of our last. And this despite any changes we may impose on field and river and mountain, on economy and manners. There is no other story. A man, after he has brushed off the dust and chips of his life, will have left only the hard, clean questions: was it good or was it evil? Have I done well or ill? In uncertainty, I am certain that underneath their topmost layers of frailty, men want to be good and want to be loved. Indeed, most of their vices are attempted shortcuts to love. When a man comes to die, no matter what his talents and influence and genius, if he dies unloved, his life must be a failure to him, and his dying a cold horror. It seems to me that if you or I must choose between two courses of thought or action, we should remember our dying and try so to live that our death brings no pleasure to the world. We have only one story. All novels, all poetry, all built on the never-ending contest in ourselves of good and evil. And it occurs to me that evil must constantly respawn, while virtue is immortal. Vice has always a new, fresh, young face, while virtue is venerable as nothing else in the world is.
In Letters to a Young Poet by Rainier Maria Rilke writes, "To love is good too, love being difficult. For one human being to love another, that is perhaps the most difficult of all our tasks, the ultimate, the last test and proof, the work for which all other work is but preparation." The reading today is from Moral Leadership, Integrity, Courage, Imagination. Oh, let's start with our opening hymn, which is number 1, "May Nothing Evil Cross This Door." Thank you, John. And now, the reading. The reading today is from Moral Leadership, Integrity, Courage, Imagination by Robert Michael Franklin. 3 defining virtues: centering down, stepping forward, and dreaming up. My working definition of moral leadership has 3 key elements: people with integrity, courage, and imagination; 2, who serve the common good; 3, while inviting others to join them. I begin by prioritizing 3 virtues: integrity, courage, and imagination. There are many other virtues that are essential for moral leadership. One thinks of the classical virtues of prudence, temperance, courage, and justice. And then there are the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love. But I would place integrity, courage, and imagination at the center of attention for this moment in history, when integrity and authenticity are necessary for restoring public trust. Courage is required for defying the forces of complacency, and imagination is essential for fashioning innovative responses to persistent problems, reforming familiar questions, and asking altogether new questions. Now, we'll talk about integrity, courage, and imagination. I see integrity as the art of centering down with intense focus on our most deeply held values, which then radiate outward in our behavior and demeanor. The great Christian mystic Howard Thurman spoke of centering down as a clarifying discipline that offers direction from a deep moral compass. I think of the image of a compass face that is submerged underwater. If the waters are calm, one can peer through them to read the compass. But if life contains waves and turbulence, we may see the compass and know it is there, but be unable to discern locations in any precise manner. Centering is also calming and focusing. Sometimes Dr. Thurman spoke of, quote, listening for the sound of the genuine, unquote, in ourselves and in others. At a commencement address at Spelman College in 1981, he told students, "There is something in every one of you that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. It is the only true guide you will ever have. And if you cannot hear it, you will, all of your life, spend your days on the ends of strings that somebody else pulls." Integrity is the quality of wholeness and the seamless integration of values, intentions, and behavior. Integrity is the starting place of all moral existence. Without integrity, action is untrustworthy and meaningless, and authentic leadership is impossible. Courage, stepping forward. I think of courage as the fearless activation of one's deepest convictions. As C.S. Lewis puts it, courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at its testing point. A chastity or honesty or mercy which yields to danger will be chaste or honest or merciful only on conditions. Courage, sometimes interpreted as fortitude, is one of the cardinal virtues in ancient moral philosophy, along with temperance, prudence, and justice. It is interesting that the word cardinal is derived from the Latin word for hinge. For many classic Christian thinkers, like Augustine and Aquinas, these four hinge virtues were combined with the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love to produce an enduring vision of the moral life. The root of the word courage is cor, the Latin word for heart. In an early form, courage meant to speak one's mind by telling all one's heart, or telling the story of who you are with your whole heart. Later, courage came to be understood as the ability to do dangerous things, to step forth for seemingly impossible tasks. No wonder we reserve the title, as a social good, of hero and heroine for those who step or leap forward to do good that others won't do. Courage is the art of stepping forward. When others step back in the face of crisis, moral leaders step forward, make themselves available, accept the risk of standing alone when necessary, but are poised to act in an impactful way. Although the struggle for social justice is a team sport, when Rosa Parks engaged in civil disobedience, she sat alone. She knew that she had allies and possibly a movement behind her, but that day she was alone. When Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy led a dangerous march on the streets of Birmingham, surrounded by uncertain followers, they knelt on the sidewalk to pray, thereby sanctifying public space, and then they began to walk forward. Without looking over his shoulder, King whispered anxiously to Abernathy, "Ralph, are you coming? Are they following?" He hadn't checked to see if anyone was following before stepping forward. Imagination, dreaming up. Finally, imagination is the art of dreaming up. where and how we can transcend the status quo. There is no more compelling trope of American dreaming than the dream that Martin Luther King Jr. shared on August 28, 1963. Those familiar with the history of that speech know that he had not planned to deliver those words for the climax of the speech. His text read differently. Before writing his speech, according to Clarence Jones, one of his key advisors, King had solicited ideas for its content. The opening of the speech spoke of America lacking sufficient funds to cash the promissory note of freedom and equality for all, an idea that Jones had suggested. Claiborne Carson notes that King had been drawing on material he used in the I Have a Dream speech in his other speeches and sermons for many years. 2 months earlier, June 23, 1963, he had proclaimed most of the famous words we know in a meeting in Detroit at Cobo Hall. But on that day, at the Lincoln Memorial, after he had delivered a summation of economic and racial injustice, arguing for the passage of the Civil Rights Act and extolling the importance of nonviolent protest, Jones said, "One of the world's greatest gospel singers shouted out to one of the world's greatest Baptist preachers." Jones was standing about 50 feet away from King during the speech when he looked over at Mahalia Jackson, who was standing nearby, and heard her call out to him, "Tell them about the dream, Martin. Tell them about the dream." Suddenly, it was like a gear in his head turned as he reached deep inside for the language that was ready and waiting. A woman whose ear was keenly attentive to audiences and responses knew the precise note that needed to be struck at that very moment. None of the other men shouted this to him. She helped launch him and his dream into history.
Now is the time for anyone who wishes to express a joy or sorrow that they have to let the community know. Now is the time for you to come up and do this and light a candle. Please remember that our service is being streamed and will be archived on the website. So just be aware of that. What you say, as long as you don't mind that it's being streamed. I got in trouble last week for saying that my wife had broken out like a prison breakout from the hospital. So not with the public, but with my wife. Anyway, anyone who has a joy and sorrow, please feel free to come forward and tell us and light a candle, and please say your name when you do so. Joys and sorrows will be followed by a silence, and then we'll be singing the hymn in the order of service, seated.
Thank you, Martin. Good morning. I'm Vicki Coccaluto, and I'm pleased to share a joy with you that within the past month, Peter and I have been blessed by visits from two of my nieces, one who lives in Illinois and is the second grade teacher of rambunctious children, and the other is a physician, and she's a medical director in Greensboro, North Carolina, at a clinic that serves those who are poor and unable to get health insurance. So there's much work to be done there. We're both very proud of our nieces and happy to see them after 3 years. Thank you.
Anyone else have a joy or sorrow they'd like to share with the community?
Once again, I'm lighting a candle for my older son, Andrew, whom I told you last week was hiking this Pacific Crest Trail. Last night, he called to say that he had gotten up at 4 with ashes on his tent, and he successfully evacuated. He was at the Oregon-California border and the Klamath Forest fire. So I light a candle, less for Andrew, but for the loss of the forest and the damage to the people in the area.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to come forward? If not, then I will light one last candle for the joys and sorrows that we hold in our hearts that we didn't express in public today, but that are very real for all of us. Our second reading this morning comes from a famous work by the late C.S. Lewis called the Screwtape Letters. There's a series of letters in which an experienced demon is mentoring a novice demon on the art of corrupting the character of a human being. My dear Wormwood, now that it is certain that the German humans will bombard your patient's town and that his duties will keep him in the thick of the danger, we must consider our policy. Are we to aim at cowardice, or at courage with consequent pride, or at hatred of the Germans? While I am afraid it is no good trying to make him brave, our research department has not yet discovered, though successes hourly expected, how to produce any virtue. This is a serious handicap. To be greatly and effectively wicked, a man needs some virtue. What would Attila have been without his courage? Or Shylock without self-denial as regards the flesh? But as we cannot supply these qualities ourselves, we can only use them as supplied by the enemy. And this means leaving him a kind of foothold in those men whom otherwise we have made most securely our own. A very unsatisfactory arrangement, but I trust we shall one day learn to do better. Hatred we can manage. The tension of human nerves during noise, danger, and fatigue makes them prone to any violent emotion, and it is only a question of guiding the susceptibility into the right channels. If conscience resists, muddle him. Let him say that he feels hatred not on his own behalf, but on that of the women and children, and that a Christian is told to forgive his own, not other people's enemies. In other words, let him consider himself sufficiently identified with the women and children to feel hatred on their behalf, but not sufficiently identified to regard their emotions as his own and therefore proper objects of forgiveness. But hatred is best combined with fear. Cowardice, alone of all the vices, is purely painful, horrible to anticipate, horrible to feel, horrible to remember. Hatred has its pleasures. It is therefore often the compensation by which a frightened man reimburses himself for the miseries of fear. The more he fears, the more he will hate. And hatred is also a great anodyne for shame. To make a deep wound in his charity, you should therefore first defeat his courage. Now, this is a ticklish business. We have made men proud of most vices, but not of cowardice. Whenever we have almost succeeded in doing so, the enemy permits a war or an earthquake or some other calamity, and at once courage becomes so obviously lovely and important, even in human eyes, that all our work is undone, and there is still at least one vice of which they feel genuine shame. The danger of inducing cowardice in our patients, therefore, is lest we produce real self-knowledge and self-loathing with consequent repentance and humility. And in fact, in the last war, World War I, thousands of humans, by discovering their own cowardice, discovered the whole moral world for the first time. In peace, we can make many of them ignore good and evil entirely. In danger, the issue is forced upon them in a guise to which even we cannot blind them. There is here a cruel dilemma before us. If we promoted justice and charity among men, we should be playing directly into the enemy's hands. But if we guide them to the opposite behavior, this sooner or later produces, for he permits it to produce, a war or revolution, and the undisguisable issue of cowardice or courage awakes thousands of men from moral stupor. This indeed is probably one of the enemy's motives for creating a dangerous world, a world in which moral issues really come to the point. He sees as well as you do that courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point, which means at the point of highest reality. A chastity or honesty or mercy which yields to danger will be chaste or honest or merciful only in conditions. Pilate was merciful till it became risky. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.
Good is universally defined as behavior that serves the interest of the group. Evil is universally defined as behavior that is not in the interest of the group. The challenge of justice, then, is to determine what acts do and do not serve the interest of the group. There is an implicit determination, however. Who is the group? Groups are made up of individuals, and those individuals are made up of subgroups, significantly complicating both questions. Fashion, popularity, religion, and politics can define subgroups that can disagree on acts of goodness and evil. Obvious examples of this in the US include gun laws and reproductive rights. So how does this work? Let's begin with obvious examples and work our way towards more complex and common moral configurations. Let's draw two separate circles representing two different groups, picnickers and ants. Most of us can agree that when we go on a picnic, having bought and prepared food, that we hope to lay out a blanket and sit down and eat our sandwiches and snacks in peace in the grass, under the trees, and sun undisturbed. Nearby ants, however, have a different perspective. They see this as an opportunity to capitalize on the windfall of delicious crumbs and seize as many of them as possible, bring them back to their nest to share with their colony, and send sorties of scouts to locate the source of this bounty so that the situation can be handled to the ants' colony's best advantage. Ant behavior does not serve the interest of the group of the picnickers, often to such a degree that members of the picnicking party see fit to dispatch with offending ants with a slap. These murders do not go unnoticed by the ants, and the colony sends even greater numbers to defend the group and wage war over the food. The picnickers fight to enjoy their outing, and the ant colony fights for survival. Ultimately, the picnickers retreat from this foreign land and leave the ants to reign again in peace. But why did the picnickers feel entitled to invade the territory of the ant colony? And why were they not concerned that they may injure members of the colony as they sat down to eat? And most of all, why did they feel entitled to swat ant after ant dead as the insects followed their instinctual urge to find and retrieve food? And what food was really at stake in most cases? Crumbs. The picnickers are killing over crumbs. Or they're killing over territory, the right to enjoy a peaceful, undisturbed lunch in this meadow on this day. Picnickers do not recognize the sovereign territory of resident ants and their colonies. Picnickers' power over ants is significant enough that they neither recognize ants as a threat nor as a class of beings with rights to be respected. In spite of the fact that the ants may regard themselves as fellow picnickers, the human picnickers do not recognize the ants' identification as picnickers and identify the ants as other, as ants, not picnickers. A group separate and apart from the group of picnickers, thus the two are mutually exclusive circles. Due to this societal and conceptual separation of the groups, the picnickers are not obligated to respect the boundaries of the ant colony's territory, nor are the picnickers obligated within their group to respect the lives of the ants. Now, I'm not here to judge well-meaning, summer-loving picnickers. And I don't believe that ants have a right to my egg salad sandwich. I'm simply painting a backdrop. I'm laying bare some of the mechanisms by which human beings categorize and justify our own behavior. If you'll allow me, it is here that I must dim the lights on this rather innocent-sounding example to concentrate on its darker shades. During the years of the Nazi regime, German doctors argued that Jews spread disease. Reflecting common themes in Nazi propaganda, these medical professionals repeatedly pushed the false claim that Jews were responsible for outbreaks of typhoid fever, a deadly contagious disease spread by lice. Next slide, please. This Nazi propaganda poster was created in 1941 for public display in German-occupied Poland. The Polish language words roughly translate to, "Jews are lice. They cause typhus." What the propagandists have done here is to cast Jews as non-human, as insects, but not just any insect, as lice that carry disease feared and deadly to humans, typhus. Jews are cast here as extremely dangerous insects. They are cast as an inherently evil but subordinate group that should be regarded with fear and aggression, stamped out like ants at a picnic. It's impossible to admit the similar rhetoric heard in the contemporary political discourse. Immigrants are infesting our country. Illegal immigrants are animals, not people. These are quotes. They all have AIDS. Those are but a few quotes we've heard in the past few years. So the casting of groups as inherently evil is an old and familiar political gambit. And the methods to do that haven't changed, characterizing a group as a non-human, insect or beast, implying that the offending group poses a mortal threat to the good group. As it turns out, the categorization of a group as evil is a common social device employed before evil is perpetrated upon that group. I make that point because good and evil are often cited as guidelines for behavior, as a means of societal control to encourage people to behave well. But the notions of good and evil are just as often used by societies as a means to encourage people to behave poorly. Next slide, please. So we start here. Next slide, please. And we go here. They are evil. Before it was we, and we are good and evil. But this is the step where we say they are evil. Therefore, we don't have to treat them with the same dignity and respect as we treat our own. So, that was some darkness. What about good? How can groups and societies and individuals employ their resources to enhance the greater good? Although I'm now an existential atheist, I have Christian upbringing. And on this topic, the New Testament of the Bible is clear. Jesus' overarching message is, love thy neighbor as thyself. Jesus attempted to bring us from here, next slide, to here. If we assume that he felt this approach would optimize good for the purpose of this conversation, let's give Jesus the benefit of the doubt. He is espousing the breaking down of boundaries between groups. Who is our neighbor? Well, it could be argued that in our global community, anyone and everyone is our neighbor. Jesus is suggesting that in order to optimize good and minimize evil, that we must strive to bridge our social groups and subgroups. Isn't this exactly what we aspire to do in the UU community with inclusion and diversity? I believe it is. And I believe that doing that is enlightened and does move us in the direction of doing more good, of serving the larger community and not just ourselves. Jesus seemed to imply that good deeds have as much to do with our relationship with others, our relationship, how we think of ourselves in relation to others, as it does the kinds of deeds we are doing. In other words, relationships direct deeds. Or even more precisely, relationships determine whether our deeds will be good or evil. At this point, I feel it necessary to point out that an absolute approach to good and evil will not get us very far. We must consider the reality of most situations, that good and evil appear to be relative. What may be good for one group or one individual may be considered evil by another group or individual. For example, it was to the advantage of settlers of the United States to disregard the boundaries and rights of native peoples as they settled their quote-unquote new land, much in the same way that it is to the advantage of China to build military installations in the South Seas, and for Russia to occupy Ukraine. Acts perpetrated in the furtherance of these claims of territory are seen by good by the perpetrator and as evil by violated parties and their allies. For the sake of simplifying this discussion, I'm setting aside the particular methods used in these occupations. So I would not be standing here speaking to you today in this lovely building with our lovely neighbors were it not for the good initiatives enacted by our ancestors to settle this land and the evil deeds enacted by them to aggress and violate the rights of native residents in the process. Thus, our deeds may simultaneously be good and evil. But no one wants to be evil. Don't we all want to be good? In order to simplify our lives morally and reduce our cognitive dissonance, we can gravitate to the interests of the groups we most closely identify with, beginning with our own interests. For example, we are Americans on U.S. soil. We are immigrants from Brazil coming to America. We are Chinese nationalists securing our borders. We are Russian citizens carrying out our patriotic duty. We are picnickers enjoying the outdoors. I am doing what is best for me and my family. To wrap up this excursion, I'm going to propose a few questions without answering them. If we can do evil while at the same time we do good, how do we get to heaven? How can there even be a heaven? How can there be a hell? And most importantly, how can God be good? How can we be good?
We have come to the point in this service where we are asked to make an offering to support this self-supporting church and its many ministries. The offering is a spiritual practice, a collective affirmation of our shared values and our commitment to the mission of this liberal religious congregation. There are different ways you can donate to the Winchester Unitarian Society. Those attending live stream will see information about how to give. Those in the sanctuary can see information presented in the order of service on how to give. Please write or type the date of your offering in the memo line or comment field. The summer choir will now sing Shine on Me, a traditional spiritual arranged by Rollo Dilworth. Those who wish to do so are invited to join in the unison affirmation printed in your order of service. We gather not for ourselves alone, but to use our common power to build the beloved community within and beyond these walls. We create and reaffirm this covenant this day to make justice flourish, to practice compassion amidst difference, and to embody transformative love. Please join us in singing hymn number 119, Once to Every Soul and Nation.
This is from Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche. What is noble? What does the word noble still mean for us nowadays? How does the nobleman betray himself, and how is he recognized under this heavy, overcast sky of the commencing plebeianism, by which everything is rendered opaque and leaden? It is not his actions which establish his claim. Actions are always ambiguous, actions inscrutable. Neither is it his works. One finds nowadays among artists and scholars plenty of those who betray by their works that a profound longing for nobleness impels them. But this very need of nobleness is radically different from the needs of the noble soul itself, and is in fact the eloquent and dangerous sign of the lack thereof. It is not the works, but the belief which is here decisive and determines the order of rank. To employ once more an old religious formula with a new and deeper meaning, it is some fundamental certainty which a noble soul has about itself, something which is not to be sought, is not to be found, and perhaps also is not to be lost. The noble soul has reverence for itself.
Please join me in reciting the words printed in your order of service for extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of commitment, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our service has ended. Please join us for coffee on the terrace and then for a discussion of our service today to happen in the parlor.